promised. I got on social media the other day and said that I would take some questions. I know some people have been reaching out about certain things, so I just want to make an open forum. Coach Heiss is going to be the MC of this. He's got the list of questions, and I'm putting 60 minutes on the clock, and hopefully I can get it done sooner than that. I think I can. And we'll roll from there. Is that too far away, or they can hear and everything? Is it good?
It'll be all right.
All right, let's
speak
roll
up a little bit. Here we go. Question number 1: how do you track total volume in the weight room? Do you only count main movements? Do you count accessories? At what intensity do you start to count the volume?
That's a really long question. That's like an entire.
That's gonna be 60 minutes.
Yeah, that's an entire. Okay, let's do that piece by piece. Give me the first part again.
How do you track total volume in the weight room?
Okay, so I think the most important thing when you're talking about tracking volume, and obviously depending on where you are from a standpoint of what kind of athletes you're training, but the biggest thing we always talk about is knowing what the end goal is, right, Coach McNally?
Yes, sir.
We talk about the load or where we want to get to. So to me, the most basic form of periodization or programming, at least how I like to look at it, and people do it differently than I do, but I like to program a year in advance. Understanding with the end goal in mind, and then we work back from that based off how much time we have. That's how fast we'll progress everything. If we have 3 weeks to achieve, is obviously significantly different than if we have 8 months to achieve that end goal. So I think first and most important when it comes to tracking volume is one, knowing what is the end goal of wherever you're trying to get to, and then you can gradually work back from there. So for us, it's a lot of things, right? It's sprinting, it's overall volume of running at high speeds. It's everything that we work in the weight room as well. And then there's obviously different phases in and out of that. But I think the best general way to answer that is we track volume in a multitude of ways, depending on whether it's on field, whether it's high speed volume, whether it's our tempos and our kind of extensive tempo conditioning, whether it's our upper back work, our squat volume, our hinge volume. Those are all different answers, but the most general basic way I can answer that question is by knowing what your end goal is. Start there and always work your way back, and then just have a logical progression in that. Does that answer that question well enough for generally speaking there, without diving into a ton of details?
Yeah.
So have the end goal in mind, and start there. Know where you want to get to. Know how much time you have, and then progressively work along that line.
Would you like to?
Yeah, keep on going. Let's go.
Do you only count main movements? Do you count accessories? I think you kind of covered that. Kind of talked about what we count. We do count accessory movements as its own separate volume, sprint volume, and its own volume. At what intensity do you start to count these volumes?
Yeah, well, I think go back to the last one. I think it's also to understand is like if you are counting volumes, understand that if we're going to count, for example, if you're adding up posterior chain volumes, you can't just look at your RDLs, eccentric hamstrings, and only own that as hamstring volume. What else is high hamstring volume? Sprinting, right? And there's examples of that all over the place in strength and conditioning and programming. So if you only specifically count and you're only thinking about what you do in the weight room, for us as we program, we count everything. So we for a lateral lunge volume, or that hinge pattern, some of those things we do in our warm-ups on the field. We own that volume. We own that volume with everything. It's not just some blatant other end of the spectrum volume. So understand that it all works in cohesion together, I think is very, very important to understand, and not just always looking at them as separate entities as you program. The other part of that question was?
What intensity do you start counting?
Yeah, it just depends. It depends on where we are. So we'll use lateral lunge as an example. That is an example of something that we count that volume at body weight. That's something that for a movement, we would count that lunge volume or that multi-directional movement at just body weight. But typically for us, we have the yellow sets or the warm-up sets, and then we have the working sets. When I'm looking at overall volume, I'm not adding in and counting up all the warm-up sets typically, unless it's like for our cleans, right? When we work some of that volume into our technique school, we'll count that volume as Olympic movement work or triple extension, whatever we're categorizing it out at in that specific time. But we don't count those warm-up sets. We only count working sets as our time.
All right. Cool. That's question number 1. Number 2, did you go to college to become a strength and conditioning coach? If so, what was your major?
Yeah, we just had a long conversation about this today. Yes, so obviously I think everybody here is exercise science. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, we just had a big kind of debate about exercise science. The NSCA either is approving or just it used to be you just need to have a college degree and then you can sit for the exam. But where they're trying to take it now is you have to have an exercise science related degree to even be able to sit for the exam. So
it has to be through an NSCA accredited school.
Yeah, right.
It's not on the table. It's on the table. They haven't. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So they're working on voting on that. So they're trying to put more emphasis in it. So one, we're getting better. There are not a lot of strength and conditioning specific degrees. I think the biggest thing that we're currently missing is practicality. Is you go and you get a lot of foundational scientific knowledge, but you don't get a lot of practical experience, which our job is incredibly practical. Example, it doesn't matter if you know the sliding filament theory if you can't teach a back squat power clean sprint mechanic. We don't get a lot of that in our exercise science degree. I think there needs to be definitely a much larger practical portion of that. I know some schools are getting much more involved in getting internships out there. Specificity, I think, is a really big piece. Exercise science is such a large realm. There's so many different pieces of it. You know, is there something that maybe it could be like a 2-year general course where everyone kind of gets, you know, the anatomy, the physiology, the biology, the chemistry, and then at that 2-year mark, it's like, hey, make a decision. What do you want to do? Do you want to go into athletic training? Do you want to go into physical therapy? Do you want to go into strength and conditioning? And then start to specialize those routes, because I do think they're much different. You know, they just are. So yes, I did go to school to be a strength coach. For me, particularly, I went to my first strength conditioning clinic when I was 16 years old. So I've known I've wanted to do this. That helped me specify and get more practicality in my undergrad. Unfortunately, I don't think we get enough of that. So building off that question would be, if you are an exercise science degree, get more practical experience. If you're looking to go to college and you're asking that question, I would still go for obviously a sports science related field, and just make sure you're doing a good job of getting summer internship opportunities and doing those kind of things. Is that the whole question?
Yeah, there's a couple other questions along here that are along those lines, so I'm just going to jump to those right now. What are the steps to transition from intern to graduate assistant to assistant to director, and what does it take to make each jump?
Who asked that question?
Jim Brophy.
Jim Brophy.
The profanator.
Shout out Jim Brophy. Okay. I had an assistant, or I had an intern that was, I don't know, I won't use his name, but if he watches, he'll know who he is. He ended up being a full-time assistant for me, but there was a snowstorm, you know, whatever, 4 or 5 inches of snow dropped. It wasn't terrible. It certainly wasn't convenient nor easy. And what he calls me and says, you know, I don't think I can make it into work today. I'm not going to be able to find a way to get there. And I just kind of responded, and I just said, boy, what would this program do if I just didn't find a way to get here today? And my whole point was that because he just thought, oh, I'm only an intern, it doesn't matter if I miss work. But when I asked him, if you were the head guy, what would you do? Well, I'd find a way to get there. And my whole point was, well, why is it any different? And that is the best advice I can give to any young coach is what is your mentality? And so anyways, I went on to write this whole little thing that day. I wrote like a little, I don't know if you want to call it a little article, but I wrote something just because I was inspired, I guess, by that event of more or less, at the end of the day, when you're an intern and you act like an intern, you will stay an intern. When you're an intern and you act like a full-time assistant, that job will find you. When you're a full-time assistant and you start acting like a director, that job will find you. You won't have to find it. And that's my best advice to young coaches is, what do you mentally prepare for on a daily basis? Is it just an intern, or is it I'm an assistant, I'm a director? Now obviously there's 2 parts to this, because you know Heist has responsibilities that don't involve doing some of the things that I need to do, or that's not his place. Same thing with Coach McNally. But mentally, they should approach every single day like they are running this program. Everything that I do they should be taking those mental reps every single day, so that when you do get in that chair, it's like you've done it your entire life. And that's probably the best thing I did as an intern, as a graduate assistant, is I can honest to God say that every opportunity I had, I took a mental rep. When I watched the head strength coach break down with the football team, I listened to every word he said, and I analyzed everything. When I watched him program, I asked him why. I, in my head, said, I think that's great. I would do this different. Now, maybe I didn't verbalize that, because at that point in time, that's not your place. Or I'd make my arguments. He'd say one, and then great, it's your way. Let's freaking go. But I had already taken so many reps at that point in time that I was more prepared than I would have been had I not been. So yeah, it's there's a million different paths, man. And he has a different path, and he has, and then I have, and everybody that I've worked for has taken a little different path. But I can tell you that you got to be patient. But you know, it's kind of like the saying of dress for the job you want, not for the job you have. And if you want to be an assistant, you better start freaking acting like it. You want to be a head guy, start freaking acting like it. And when you do that, like I said, that job will find you. You won't have to find it.
You kind of answered that question. Okay. Next one here. Is a trap bar deadlift a squat pattern or a deadlift pattern?
Yeah, I mean, my first initial instinct to answer that question is, why does it matter? I think and I say that not to be an ass, but just to say, I was like, what are you chasing in that question? The body knows stimulus, right? So to me, it's like, I think about things, when I think about those movements, I think about stimulus as far as what are we trying to achieve? Are you just talking about are you trying to ask which movement is better? Like, I'd like more context as to what the question is, I think, before you answer it. But a trap bar deadlift is more of a squat pattern than it is a deadlift pattern, or a conventional deadlift pattern would be my opinion on the answer. But if you're trying to chase like a stimulus, once again, those are things that, like, if we're talking max strength, right? We're trying to achieve a max strength lower body movement. Is there a big difference in the stimulus of doing a squat versus a trap bar deadlift versus a regular deadlift? If that's the stimulus you're chasing, you can pick the movement you want and insert that in for that particular stimulus. Now, obviously, based off your movement pattern, are you getting different activation patterns? Are you getting different recruitment patterns? Yeah, you are. But are we chasing stimulus? I guess it's kind of a more context would be. Yeah, as far I'd like to answer that question better. I just feel like I need more context to completely answer what that is. But if it's just simply what it is, I would trap bar deadlift, where that weight is on your body, that's more of a squat pattern than it is a deadlift pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say you can absolutely coach it both ways. You can get them into a much more hinged position.
Oh, for sure.
Pull
yeah.
it, but you can, you're going to see, for the most part, the way you're set up in that trap bar, it's a much more squatting pattern. As far as
and once again, I feel like the question, I think, what I feel like they're probably trying to get at is just, is this an appropriate adaptation for a squat? And if that's good, then absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're chasing a max strength stimulus and you're saying, hey, can I trap bar deadlift and get a similar movement pattern and a similar stimulus to a back squat? The answer is yes, absolutely. And we do it often here with guys that have issues back squatting. So I think that's probably what the context is. And if it is, yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Cool. Next question.
Yep.
If you're a high school strength coach with limited time and space, how would you warm up your kids prior to a training session?
Who asked that question?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Once again, some of these are context is kind of a need to know. I'll say this with, the two E's that we talk about here all the time is efficiency and effectiveness. So, like, what is your low hanging fruit? So let me give you an example. Typically, we will always have like a technique school station here as part of our warm ups. Well, we don't have time to run warm up stations right now. Or sorry, we'll start off with really hammering home different technical positions of the Olympic movements after we're done warming up. Right now, we don't have time, so that it's 95 pounds on the bar, it's 135 pounds on the bar. They can do that now, so we've just instead replaced that as our warm up. So those things like where you can get those kind of things you were gonna do anyways, and how you can prep that into a warm up, I think that is a very efficient way to do it. Over at squats, I think are a great way to warm up the entire body. And that's a movement you want to hit anyways. Incorporating things like once again at a high school level, are you going to have guys lateral lunging the house? Probably not. They probably just need basic work on that movement pattern. So guess what? You can take that and you can incorporate it into your warm up. You're killing two birds with one stone. So my question would be then, where can you take those movements and incorporate them into your warm up that you still get that volume and you count it, but you're not warming up to really warm up.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about our warm-ups currently in spring ball you just mentioned, and then our warm-up for our developmental guys in the season. We don't have a lot of time. I mean, we slammed the med ball and line hop, and then we did technique work with the bar, empty bar, 95 pounds in your hand for 15 minutes, and guess what? They're warm and ready to squat and everything else you want to do.
Where can you multitask is the biggest thing. What movements can they do? Which is, like I said, a lot of technical work that can be. I mean, that is warming up. So where can you get that and multitask and put that in your program to where you're getting a thermogenic benefit of guys that are heating their bodies up. They're getting warm. They're starting to hinge. They're starting to get some recruitment. I think neuromuscular, you have to wake up the system. So that's why we would do like just line hops and med ball slams. Something that's very, very easy, quick bang for your buck. And then by the time we're in 15 minutes, they're in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing too, we used to talk about at Akron, but we still do it now here with when we have the longer time to warm up. You're essentially just sneaking in work that you would be getting in otherwise. So I think about when we're on the field or right before we hit our complexes, like we do all of our core work right there in our lines, and we call it our warm up, but we're actually just training already.
It's volume that we didn't have time to get on Tuesday,
exactly.
So we put it in there.
Exactly, and so those when you're crunched for time, I mean, just throw things in there that you want to sneak in work, and we're good to go.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great way to do it. And specifically prep for movements you're going to do that day. If you got a single leg squat later in the workout, single leg prep work is obviously fantastic. Where can you sneak that in? If you're trying to work on, if you want to do knee prehab, right? That's why we do VMOs in the warm up. That's knee prehab that maybe you do at the end of the workout or somewhere in the middle. We use it as a warm up. It's a great warm up and it's great knee prehab. So it's two birds, one stone. Yeah. Check box, yeah, that's a good example. Check as many boxes as you can. Efficiency, effectiveness.
Yeah, move on.
Yeah.
Good. Next.
Yeah, roll.
What are some of the elements you have seen from the worst and the best strength programs you have observed?
Strength programs. I mean, the best variables I have seen is the first thing that just comes to mind is just an open-minded staff, a staff that is urgent to learn, that wants to find the best way to do it. I think anytime you have that, you're going to have a solid strength and conditioning program because you got guys at the helm that want to find a way to be progressive. Guys that don't speak in absolutes is a big thing that I'd say when I talk to who I consider the best strength coaches around the country. It is always an open conversation. It's never that there's not necessarily right, wrong. It's always a conversation. It's not speaking in absolutes. It's open-minded. Now, at the end of the day, there's still their way and my way and this way, that way, but it's always an open-minded conversation. I'd say that's the absolute number one variable in a good strength and conditioning program from a general standpoint. Specifically, I am definitely getting towards the point where I think the better strength and conditioning programs in the country spend, I will say more, but just more than what we would consider normal time in movement and sprinting and moving on a field or on their particular field of play, whether it be a court or whatever it may be. Really working on the movement and not just the old days of if they got an hour with them, they're going 50 minutes in the weight room and maybe get 10 minutes of quick agilities at the end. I definitely believe in that the more time we spend moving, the better. And I think there's a lot of commonalities of that. The best programs, I think, are not slaves to their numbers. So their numbers don't run their programs. More so, they're looking at what guys are doing. They're they're looking and chasing stimulus. They're looking and chasing, how they're moving, not necessarily what the results are. It's not, I gotta have 30, 315 pound cleaners, or our program is terrible. I gotta have 500, 600 pound squatters, or our program is terrible. So not being a slave to the numbers. I think those are some common traits, and then I'd say the poorer ones I've seen are the opposite. There's a balance of culture and hard things versus being intelligent about what you're doing, and using scientifically based research, and more importantly, result based research. I think when you get on the other end of that, and it's just culture, as hard as everything can be, let's make it. I think those tend to be more injured, riddled, non-successful strength and conditioning programs. I think obviously people who speak in absolutes, this is the only way to do it. Those are typically pretty poor programs that aren't open to new ideas. I do think we're getting better. I think as an industry, I think we're getting better. But I'd say those are the main ones that I see commonality between really good programs and really bad programs. And then obviously the leadership as well. Good programs, the leaders lead by example. They put the kids first. They truly have the kids' interests in mind first. They want to do whatever they can to help the kids get better, which leads to having a growth mindset. Poor programs are just the opposite. What can I do to make do for myself today? Is a poor example of a program. So there's a lot. I mean, there's a laundry list here that we could talk about, but those are probably the main ones that come to my mind immediately.
I think one thing I know I've seen is that anytime you understand individual differences and stuff like that for athletes and stuff, and the way I might move through a squat might be a little bit different from how you might move and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think if you look around the weight room and everybody almost looks the same with respect to their individual differences, that tells me that coach is taking the time to really teach the movements. And it's not like, oh, this guy's going to squat to full depth. This guy only squats an inch above parallel. This guy, his hang position is this position versus this guy is in a different spot. I think seeing consistency in terms of how your athletes move and you take into account their individual differences, I think that tells a lot about coaches too.
Yeah, 100%. That was what we had a conversation with Sam Macho last week about players having, getting some space to kind of figure out their own solutions and doing some of those things. And yeah, there's exceptions to everything. I mean, that's a great example of, there's some programs that you're squatting ass to grass, and it don't matter what that pelvis looks like. It don't matter how many back surgeries or what we squat in this program. That's what we do. And then there's programs like what we talk about where there's a depth we would like every athlete to reach. It doesn't mean they're all going to reach there, based off anatomy, based off insertion, based off of their hips and you name it, of injury, a previous injury, you name it. So there is more room for space, I think, in a good strength and conditioning program for athletes to do things that are more advantageous to them as well. Good addition, Coach McNally.
Hey, that's what I'm hearing about. More than just good looks.
Yeah, and that's tough to beat.
Here we go. Next question. What essential things do you do outside the weight room to be a great coach?
Serve. You serve. I mean, that's what it is outside of the weight room. We talk about this all the time, but I won't tolerate working with people that are not elite human beings. And it's a lifestyle to me, and I don't mean that in the cliche way but if we're gonna do something, we're gonna do it full-heartedly, and you live that life, and that's to me, that is the most important thing you can do outside of this weight room to be a good coach. I guess if I'm talking non-related specifically to the athletes, is just be a great human being. Get out there and serve people, serve your wife, serve your children. Be a great husband, be a great father, be a great leader in the community. Use your freaking platform to help people to get better. And I think when your athletes see that, not only does that help them tremendously, but that's a big thing for me is don't just tell me you're going to be a great strength coach. It's just I'm going to be great, period. There's not these lines in life where you get to insert what you're going to be great at. And if you do that, I think that outside of being a coach, that's the best thing you can do to make yourself better here is by living that day in and day out.
How do you handle losing a job and pursuing the next one?
Who asked that question? They must have known that I got fired.
I don't know. Not a lot of these had names on, just because the way you sent them to me.
Yeah, so that's the tough thing about this industry. So more or less, at Akron, was there for 7 years, right? And it was a really, really great time. Great to have your first job last 7 years and be able to be the head of a program and be at one university for that long it's rare at any point in your career, let alone your very first stop. So it's tough, man. It's really tough. And then I'll tell you what makes it tougher is every year I felt like I got better at my job. As far as actual, if you're just looking at numbers, if you're whatever it may be, that the year we got fired, 2018. After that season, which the previous season we were MAC East champions, right? We had won more games in a 4-year span, I think, than anybody in the history of that program. So we had done some really good things there. Had some troubles at quarterback, and we lost some games, and that's college football. Okay, but going into that season from a standpoint of community service, most we'd ever done in my career there. From a standpoint of injuries, best injury rate we'd ever had there. From a standpoint of you name a variable, from a standpoint of clean, bench, squat, 40s, verts, broads, it was the best numbers we'd ever had there. From a standpoint of disciplinary issues, it was the best we'd ever had there as far as guys being on time to things, you name it. So in the weight room, or the things that I could directly control, it was by all regards the best year of my career there. And what happened? Just like everybody else, when the axe came down, it got my head too. Okay, and that's very, very hard to deal with. Especially when you're so invested in something, to know that no matter what, no matter how well maybe you do, particularly in your realm, at the end of the day, it's 18 to 22-year-old kids that are impacting whether you can feed or not feed your family. So one, I'd say that was very tough to deal with. Just understanding it, like man, this is it. This is my career. This is real now. So they say you're not a real strength coach till you get fired, and there's a piece of that I think that is true. I'd say probably the best advice that I got was from Daryl Funk. Called me and just said, I don't need to tell you this. I know you're positive. It's going to work out for you, which I never doubted that. But he said, there's not very many times for the next 30, 40 years of your life that you'll have this opportunity. I said, what do you mean? And he goes, when you get in these situations, you do the things that you can't normally do right now. It's freaking what? It's November 27th, and I'm at home. So he's like, go fly just somewhere and visit your best friend and spend a weekend with him. I did it. He said, spend time with your wife, who you usually normally get to hang out with for 5 minutes a day, and I did it. And so I think the best advice I got was do the things you normally can't do, because you'll be right back in this field. You're going to get a job. You never know when. So take advantage of this opportunity to do the things that normally you can't do. Go to Spain. Went to Spain. Went and visited my wife's family. I did those things, took advantage of that time. Okay. Now that being said, the other thing that you got to do is you got to get on the horn and reach out to people. But that's why it's more important you don't get your next job when you're fired. You get your next job while you have a job. That's from networking with people, from doing things the right way and being a good person. And you do those things. It's not like you get fired, you haven't done that, you ain't getting a job in a month. That is not how it's happening. You get a new job by building that network and keeping up with those people. And if you're a guy that the only time you call your entire network and you send them letters, if the only time you do that is every time you get fired, you think those people are gonna pick up that phone call? No. So you keep in touch with them, and it doesn't have to be overboard, but it's not like when I did that. I literally went through my phone, and I did it more so for the purpose that I just had time. So I went to a coffee shop every day, and I had a list of people. And man, I talked to this guy in 4 months, and I had conversations, and caught up with people, and did those things. Less of, I wasn't calling and saying, hey, I need a job. It was calling and saying, hey, what's new? Like what's going on with you? And so I think that's important too. So it's a heck of an experience. You got to stay positive through it all, and if you've done a good job, day in and day out. You know, we talk about interviewing, every day is an interview. The day you actually get one isn't when you. That's not the day you walk in with your tie and your suit and that. It's every day you walk in here, you're interviewing, and that's with everybody. That's with the janitors, with the coaches, with you name it. So, yeah, it's a good question.
If you go back in time and talk to the version of yourself when you first became a strength coach, what would you say?
Yeah, less is more. You know, I was 23 when I became the director at Akron, and I didn't want to shortchange the kids. I didn't want them to be underprepared. So instead, I'm like, well, back squat or front squat? Why not both, right? So, you know, it might be 3 sets of 5 back, and then we transition to 3 sets of 5 front squat, and that was, you know, it was out of good thought, but I didn't want to miss anything. I didn't want to get to the season and be like, man, I let them down. We didn't do this, and part of that was being young and naive, and part of that was being young and naive. So, you know, you learn those things, but you know, we did everything. And if I can honestly say, there's one thing that I've learned that's like the most prevalent thing is less is more. And I know I'm on the end of people coming to look at our program, and if you're not like used to it and you don't know my philosophy, you're like, that's it. Like that's all you're gonna do. Like that's it. They're gonna come in, they're gonna sprint, they're gonna squat and hinge, and that's all they do. And if I would have seen that 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I'd have been like, dude, whose program is that? And just like vice versa. Now I look back on that and I go, I can't believe I used to do that. So, but I can say this honestly, that every year, I'd say not probably these last 3 years, I've gotten kind of where I'm kind of leveling out here. But for probably 4 straight years, every year I cut things out of our program. Do we need this? Why do we need this much of this? It looks like, you know, we're getting whatever. Cut it out. Do we need it? Cut it out. Do we need it? Cut it out. Probably did that for 4 years, and every single year we cut things out. What happened to our results? Freaking skyrocketed. The first time that I really will cut down our sprint volume, as far as really emphasizing the fact that we are going to sprint, not kind of sprint, and then we're going to get full recovery, and dropping that and maybe going 12 reps, total reps in an entire sprint workout. Like I was on pins and needles, like, oh my God, there's no way this is gonna work. Like this ain't enough. And the first time we ever did our average 30 went down 0.17 seconds, over a tenth and a half, which is, you know, unbelievable in 8 weeks. And that was our average, you know, our average. So,
you said you doubted that decreasing the volume would ever work. So why did you implement it if you had doubt in it?
Because it was just something that you kind of just, you have that inkling of I think this is it, you know, I think I'm right, and then there's I know I'm right, you know, and I was in that I think I'm right phase, and it's the hard thing is whether either I didn't know where to look for it, or it definitely wasn't as prevalent as it is today. There wasn't a lot of information on sprinting, and there wasn't a lot of books specifically out there on sprint volume, or at least that I knew or had access to getting at that point in time about. And so as I kind of just learned on my own and developed and talked to people, and I'm like, man, maybe this is it. Maybe we give this a try. And honestly, it would always start with anytime I try something new, I'd always try it on myself. And then typically from there, it'd be in a small group environment. So I'd try it on my NFL guys that I'd be training. Once it would work with me, and then it would work really well with them, and then I'm like, damn, okay, let's roll. But still, I mean, it's and there's a lot of things that we did that weren't research approved, but you know, made sense. For example, you know, I've been doing heavy sled sprints my entire career. I've always liked the concept of getting guys in that good horizontal vector and having to push a ton of force behind them. I've always thought that would cross over. Research early on in my career showed that if you ever load a sled more than 10% of a guy's body weight, you'll destroy his sprint mechanics. Well, to me, I looked at that and I said, well, we're not sprinting, we're accelerating. And all we're doing is this is allowing us to stay in that acceleration phase over and over and over and over. We're not getting upright, so how could that affect our sprint mechanics? Because we're not in sprint mechanics. That was my thought process. But that's not what the research showed. But it made sense to me, so I tried it. And I liked it. And then I liked the way we looked with my athletes, and I loved the results we got from it. And guess what happened about 3 to 5 years after that? There's now a bunch of research that shows that heavy sled sprints work. So there's what was the other thing that we were just talking about? I was talking about the other day. There's now research coming out for it that we've been doing for years, and there's something to do with sprinting. Maybe it was a 2 mass model. I don't know, but there's something I can't remember off the top of my head right now that I got ridiculed for. Some people were like, that doesn't, that's not what the literature says, and I'm like, yeah, but it works. And it works. I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was the people. I used to get criticized for counting sprinting as hamstring volume. That's not hamstring volume. You have to train eccentric hamstrings. That's where you get your injury prevention from. And now we do those things. You guys know that. But I would sit there in clinics and I would say you have to sprint to stay healthy. You have to accumulate that volume. You have to train the hamstrings the speed they're going to be sprinting at. So the best way to do that is sprint. And lo and behold, guess what research just came out like 5 months ago about hamstrings and sprinting. It's more effective with reducing hamstring injury than any eccentric isometric or whatever it may be. So it kind of all catches up, but you have to be willing to try. I think I know. I think I'm right. I know I'm right.
All right, so that's all we had from the ask and answer on Instagram there, and then we have some questions here from our intern staff. So the first question we have from these guys is, how do you manage the work-life balance without losing out in one area?
You don't. I think we talked about this. A little bit. There's always
that was my answer as I was typing it out. You know,
there's always a sacrifice, but that's for anything, right? It's what we talked about when I talked about with these guys in that cultural meeting, right? There is a price to being great, and it's either you are or you aren't willing to pay it. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like something doesn't. Yeah, of course. If you really want to be great at anything, though, that's not just being a strength and conditioning coach. So if you're not ready or prepared to pay that price, the price of what it takes to be great, I'm not gonna say you're in the wrong. See, Zach, I'm not gonna say you're in the wrong industry. I'm gonna say you're just not gonna ever be successful. Period. Now, obviously, in our industry specifically, it's hard. It's more challenging. There's never time for anything. There's never the right time for anything. You have to make time, and we talked about this already. There's never a right time. There's never a time to take your wife out to dinner. There's just not. You have to make time to do those things. There's never a time to pick your kid up from school. You either make time or you don't. There's never a convenient time to go, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna go to that pediatrician appointment. Either you go or you don't go. You make time for those things. So there always is gonna be a sacrifice. Understand that. That will not change. There is a price to being great in anything. If you're willing to pay it, you'll get there. If you're not, you won't. Plain and simple. But there's also not just convenient times for things. You either make the time, you make time for your spiritual life, or you don't. Right? Sunday morning, the last thing I want to do is get up at 8 o'clock, get dressed, and go to church. But I do it because it's important to me. There's no, like I said, there's no time to get home and have dinner with your wife. Because what do you want to do when you get home? You want to sleep, man. You want to take a shower. You want to go to bed. You want to sleep. There's not time, but you make time because it's important to you. So yeah, the answer is you don't, and you have to make the time, or else it doesn't work.
How do you keep a good relationship with your athletes while maintaining the respect necessary to be an effective coach?
Yeah, I mean it's a fine line, but it all comes down to caring. And it's got to be genuine. Is one, what Coach Mignani hit earlier is you have to know your athletes. You have to know that the way I get on Giovanni Ruiz is a little bit different than the way I might get on a guy who is more sensitive and more guarded and less trustworthy. You have to understand that you have to have those conversations differently with different people. A guy I might be able to light up in front of the team and I know he'll respond to it is not, there's just as many guys that I need to pull into my office one-on-one and have that conversation with. So it depends. It's dependent on the athlete, one, and knowing how to have those conversations regardless, but two, they have to genuinely know that you care. And if that is the case, whether they agree with you or not on whatever you're trying to correct them on, they'll know it's coming from the right place. And that's how you get that respect. And that is the line is once they know that you truly care about them, you care about their family, you care about them as an athlete, you care about them as a person, they don't necessarily always have to agree with you or think that you're right or think that it's fair, because they respect you, because they know that you care. So those would be the two biggest things. Is one, you have to truly, genuinely, authentically care about the kid. And two, you have to know how to communicate with different athletes. They're not all the same. You have to understand that different athletes need different communication tactics to them. It doesn't mean that you, like I said, you alter the standard for everybody. The standard's got to stay the same, but the way you send that message can be done differently to different athletes.
Yeah, I think the one saying that comes to mind when I think of that question is friendly, not friends. You know, these young athletes, I mean, they're a lot of good people. Okay, it'd be really easy to become friends with these guys and go out to dinner with them and go play video games, but like, they are not your friends. And you can be friendly, and as long as that line of respect is there, then it stays there. And if you go ahead and cross that line, then I think they feel more willing to cross that line back in the other direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
What are some of the certifications you can get as a strength and conditioning coach? So just two, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's certifications are once again are great, but obviously the coaching is the most valuable thing you can bring anywhere. You know, it's your ability to coach is your number one ability, and your ability to not coach is your number one inability. So that's more important than anything that you can possibly bring certification wise. The NSCA, CSCS is one thing that you either have to have that or the CSCCA, which is what is the actual certification? SCCC, yeah, whatever. Okay. So you have to have one of those two, which, you know, they both have their pros and cons in my opinion.
Yeah, they're essentially just a right to play.
Right, and that's kind of it. The two, you know, out of the things that you know, once again, cost and all those things get into these things. I told you, bar none, the best bang for your buck. I think certification outside of those is the Altus Short Sprints course. I think I should be getting paid kickback. I should get T-shirts, something from Altus because how much I've promoted that program. But it's just honestly, wow. It's for what it is, guys. I'm telling you, it's $150. I mean, you get an FRC course. What is it? $3,000. It's crazy. I'm telling you,
FRC is expensive.
Yeah, it's crazy. And
it's not expensive. It's expensive.
And applicably, what you get out of that, is it good? Yeah, it's good. But to me, what I took, and this is after years and years of studying this stuff, and still took that course and was like, man, that is the most comprehensive, digestible platform of that. So I think that's great. Precision nutrition, I think, is right up that alley in the sense that it is nothing earth-shattering, but it is super digestible. It is more. I think it's $1,500 if I remember correctly, or maybe it's at least $1,000.
It's over $1,000.
Is it? Yeah. So, but as far as digestibility and learning and understanding, I think the precision nutrition courses are top notch. So those are my two personal favorites that I've done or looked into and seen. Just for that period, like I said, it's applicability, what you can get from it and apply, and then the digestibility of it. It's a well thought out, verbalized course. They're both really good. So
I think with both those, you're probably getting just kind of bang for your buck.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think those are two things that I apply a lot of things that I learned in both of those. So
I just think when it comes to all the certifications available out there for all different things, like bang for your buck is the biggest thing, and understanding who is supplying it. I mean, you know, those Precision Nutrition and the Altus, like, those are well-respected companies that are asking for your money to teach you good things. There's a lot of people out there who are going to ask for your money to give you a certification that doesn't mean anything. There's so many certifications. It's like, yeah, I got this weekend certification. What the heck's it going to do for you other than take your money out of your bank and teach you some things you already knew? So making sure you have recommendations for things you're going to do, and people who have paid the money and said, hey, this was worth the money I spent on it. Because there are a lot of things out there that are, there's not just those two certifications. There's plenty that are out there that are worth it. But for that many that are worth it, there's just as many that are just a piece of paper printed off a printer that you paid $1,500 for.
And I think one thing that's important for you guys to realize too is that certified doesn't necessarily mean qualified, right?
Oh, Coach, nice.
Just straight fuego. Did I lose it there?
Yep.
Maybe we can edit that part out.
Definitely not.
Okay. Yeah, we shoot from the hip sometimes. Certified doesn't equal qualified, right? And really, like my thought process behind it is like get a certification so you can get a job, but then understand that your coaching and your ability to provide unique skills to a program is going to be the difference. Not the 13 letters that you have after your name of every single acronym that you could possibly imagine. That ain't really it, right? It's the skill set, it's the coaching. That's really what makes the difference.
Acronym soup.
Acronym soup.
All right, last question here. What are some effective ways to network with other strength coaches, and do strength coaches typically network outside of their sport?
Yeah, I think that there's different platforms of networking. Number one thing to me is don't forget to network with the coaches that you're with every single day. That is the most important network you have right now. As you go and you have your first experience, second experience, those guys that you are with every single day, like I told you, every day is an interview. That is the network you need to take most care of right now. Make sure that you don't leave that particular place without having really networked with the guys that you were with every single day. Being so worried about getting your next job that you're not focused on networking at the current job that you're at. Okay, so number one, that is my number one advice for networking is make sure you network in-house first. Develop relationships with the trainers, with the coaches, you name it. This is your number one network platform right now. So don't mix that up. I think so many people do it wrong and think about, oh, they're so focused on the exterior that they forget about the interior networking. Don't forget about interior networking. That is the most important thing right now. Okay. Then, so that's one, right? Then two is the exterior networking, and that is all about building relationships and understanding what networking actually is. One email, one phone call, one 30-second elevator interaction is not networking, but people call it that and they think that is it. Okay, I've ran into many people in my time that have tried to reach out and network, that have written an email, that have written a letter. Okay, over the last 8 years of my career, I can't remember all of them. What do you think the guys that I can remember did?
So you on like a regular basis or every now and then?
They developed a relationship with me.
They came.
Okay, and those are the only. If you said I could start to name them off the top of my head the people that really truly networked with me. That is the people that to this day I still keep in touch with, and they worked their way in. Right? They wrote an email. They found out which conference I was going to, and they asked to meet up for lunch. They called me monthly after that to ask me about programming. They set up times to have phone calls. They wrote a letter after each phone call to say thank you for taking time to spend time with me on the phone. Those guys built relationships with me. That is what networking is. Okay? Networking is relationships. It's not a 30-second phone call or a half-page written note. Networking is developing relationships. That's both interior and exterior. But as you guys are reaching out to people, right? It's you got to have layers to networking, right? I reached out to an email, right? I want to email 20 strength coaches. Email them, great. Then try to set up a phone call. Set up a phone call, great. Then write a handwritten letter thanking them for that. Then try to find out, can I get on the phone with you again in a couple months? And start to develop that relationship. That is true networking. If you don't do that, you don't have a freaking chance.
So if I met you at the CSCCA and we talked for 30 seconds, I can't list you as a reference. Am I listening?
But I mean, the sad thing is like, people talk about elevator pitches and that stuff all the time, and it's like, man, you'd have to have a hell of an elevator pitch for 30 seconds for me to remember who you are. Not to say, I guess that's not possible, but if there was no follow-up to that conversation, it's not like I'm just going to be like, oh, hey, I got your number on an elevator for 30 seconds. You want a job? That's not realistic. And I think people vest too much into that. Oh yeah, you called me one time and we talked on the phone for 14 minutes. Want a job? That's not networking, right? The whole point of having a network is to hopefully help you out someday, whether it be knowledge or whether it be job, whatever it may be. Develop relationships. Like most things in life, develop relationships.
I think one big thing too is going to visit other coaches. I think that probably goes on a little bit of it. Like if you show that you're willing to invest in like the travel and hey, I'm gonna get a hotel for a week on my spring break to come hang out with you guys so I can see you guys learn and stuff like that. To me, I think that stands out more than just hitting somebody with an email, right? Maybe that's part of the layers to it, right? But actually going to visit, see how people do it, ask them questions, take them out to lunch, stuff like that. I think that goes a really long way too.
Solidifies his relationships, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you just said in there too was ask people questions. Don't just send an email that says, "Hey, this is who I am, and I just want you to know who I am." Okay,
Let me know if
that's
you have a
great.
job.
Ask me a question about literally anything that we can expand upon in a full conversation. You know, don't just ask a question that requires a yes or no answer. Ask a thought-provoking question, something that can be discussed over time, and that will do exactly what he's talking about. That will allow for phone calls to be set up, for subsequent phone calls to be set up, to go, hey, why don't you come out and watch us train for a weekend? Okay, great. And that will allow those relationships to build.
Yeah, that reminds me of many things. I've vented to you about this before. Is
Yes.
someone emails me and says, "Hey, coach, you mind hopping on the phone for 5 minutes?" Yeah, absolutely. Here's my number. What time? Okay, this time. Call, answer the phone. They introduce themselves over the phone, and then the whole conversation is me asking them questions because I realize they prepared nothing. They don't have anything to ask me. They sit there, yeah, you know, this is what I do for a living. This is you know the current situation, and then it's like, oh, okay, great.
It's
So
dead air.
so how many teams do you train? How many? And they have had nothing prepared. They just wanted to just say they had the conversation. Is that developing a relationship? No. So if you guys call and reach out to people, please have something. Have
Be direct.
yeah. Hey, you know, I watched I saw a YouTube clip of you at USC in 2016, and I noticed you were doing this exercise. Man, that looked really, really good. What was your volume on that? Oh, really? Why? Oh, awesome. So how did you progress to that? Was there a regression to that? If guys couldn't do it, was there progression? And have some things to actually talk about with the coaches. Don't just call and be like, oh, I'm on the phone now. This is great. Relationship built.
And I think also just to kind of piggyback off that a little bit too, like if you are going to call coaches and stuff like that, maybe don't have your first questions be, what advice would you have for a young strength coach, right? That's such a generic question. They've probably been asked a million times,
Ask
right?
ask real questions.
Ask a real question, right? Not, don't have your first thing, what books would you recommend I read if I want, it's like, you know, ask something that has some substance to it. And then if you get to that conversation, like, all right, hey, I know we got to go. Hey, I guess before we log out here, what would you recommend I do to get my next call, or whatever the case might be, but actually have some substance to the question you ask before that.